We live in a world that is overflowing with problems. Financial strain, broken relationships, unexpected diagnoses, emotional battles, and private storms that no one else sees. Some of us are fighting battles that do not announce themselves on our faces, but they weigh heavily on our hearts. And in moments like these, the question rises from deep within, what do I do now? The answer is both simple and powerful. You pray. Prayer is not a weak whisper tossed into the wind. Prayer is a divine conversation with the God who holds the universe in his hands. When we face difficulties, we often reach first for our own solutions, our logic, our resources, our strength. But God invites us to shift our focus. He says, "Call to me, and I will answer you." He never promised that life would be free of problems, but he did promise that no problem would ever be bigger than his presence. Sometimes the problem is not the problem. The real issue is our perspective. When Peter stepped out of the boat, the storm didn't stop. The waves didn't shrink. But as long as his eyes were fixed on the one who called him, the storm had no power over him. It was when he shifted his gaze from God to the wind that he began to sink. Your problem has not defeated you. Your focus has simply drifted. Prayer refocuses the soul. Prayer realigns the heart. Prayer reminds the mind who is truly in control. You may think you need an answer right now, but sometimes God gives peace before he gives solutions. Sometimes he calms your heart before he calms the storm. And there are days when he allows the storm to continue so that your faith grows stronger than your fear. Every major breakthrough in Scripture began with someone praying in a place of desperation. Hannah prayed through tears. Daniel prayed in danger. Elijah prayed under pressure. Jesus himself prayed in agony. Why? Because prayer is the bridge between earthly problems and heavenly solutions. Some of you are carrying problems that have lasted for months, maybe even years, and you've convinced yourself that nothing is changing. But hear this carefully, just because you don't see movement doesn't mean God isn't working. Seeds grow underground before they rise to the surface. Miracles often begin in silence. Breakthroughs are prepared long before they appear. Prayer activates what you cannot see. When you pray, God releases wisdom you never had, strength you never felt, and clarity you never imagined. He steps into the situation, not always to remove the problem, but often to reshape your heart so the problem can no longer control you. And when God begins to move, mountains shift, doors open, and chains break. So today, bring your problem to him fully, honestly, boldly. Don't rehearse the fear. Release the fear. Don't magnify the problem. Magnify the God who already holds the solution. Because the moment you pray, heaven begins to rearrange what earth cannot resolve. Prayer is not your last option. It is your first line of power. Too many times, we treat prayer like a fire extinguisher hanging on the wall, something we break open only when the flames are out of control. But listen carefully. Prayer was never meant to be the place you run when everything is falling apart. Prayer is the place you stand before anything falls apart. I want you to hear this with all the weight it deserves. Long before the problem shows its teeth, long before the storm gathers its clouds, long before the fear begins whispering in your mind, there is a power available to you that can shift the very atmosphere around you. And that power is activated the moment you pray, not after you panic, not after you try everything else, not after you exhaust your strength. It begins when you kneel, when you seek, when you call. You see, the reason so many people feel overwhelmed is not because their problems are too big. It's because their prayers are too delayed. They wait until the pressure is unbearable, and then they say, "Now I need God." But what if we reverse the sequence? What if prayer became the first breath we take in crisis, not the last gasp? What if prayer became our instinct, not our backup plan? When you make prayer your first move, something extraordinary happens. You stop fighting battles you were never designed to fight alone. You stop carrying burdens that were never meant for your shoulders. You stop trying to engineer solutions with limited understanding, and you begin drawing from a divine well that never runs dry. Hear me, prayer is not a ritual. It is not a religious performance. It is a lifeline. It is a direct line to the God who knows the end from the beginning, who sees what you cannot see, who works where you cannot work, and who moves in ways you cannot imagine. When you speak to him, you access a strength that does not bend under pressure and a wisdom that does not collapse under confusion. The moment you pray, heaven leans in. The moment you pray, God begins to orchestrate what you cannot control. The moment you pray, something shifts, not always around you, but always within you. Prayer changes the battlefield, not because the battle ceases to exist, but because your position in it becomes different. You move from fear to faith, from confusion to clarity, from exhaustion to renewal. And let me tell you something else. When prayer comes first, peace comes faster. Peace is not the absence of a storm. Peace is the presence of God in the storm. Prayer invites that presence. Prayer opens the door to that assurance. Prayer anchors you when life tries to toss you into chaos. So the next time a problem rises up against you, don't panic. Don't pace the floor. Don't rehearse every worst-case scenario. Instead, do the most powerful thing you can do. Stop, breathe, and pray. Before you think, before you react, before you fear, pray. Because when prayer is your first line of power, no problem will ever have the final word over your life. God uses problems to position you for breakthroughs you could never create on your own. You may look at what you're facing right now and feel as if life has backed you into a corner, but let me tell you something powerful. What feels like a setback to you may very well be the setup God has designed for your elevation. I want you to lean in and hear this, because this truth has the power to shift everything about the way you see your circumstances. We often assume that problems mean God is distant, uninterested, or unmoved. But in reality, problems are often the very tools he uses to move us, shape us, and redirect us. Some of the most extraordinary breakthroughs in your life will emerge from the very situations you prayed would disappear. You see, we naturally resist discomfort. We avoid pressure. We escape difficulty. But God, in his wisdom, often places us in moments that stretch us so that something greater can be born within us. When Joseph was thrown into the pit, it looked like a disaster. When he was sold into slavery, it looked like betrayal. When he was falsely accused and thrown into prison, it looked like injustice. But every single one of those moments, every painful, confusing, discouraging step was positioning him for a destiny he could never have orchestrated. And the same God who opened palace doors for Joseph is the same God orchestrating things behind the scenes in your life right now. You may not see movement. You may not see progress. You may not see hope. But God sees the full picture. He knows exactly where this problem is taking you. He knows the strength it's building in you. He knows the doors it will open. He knows the miracles it will attract. Let me speak directly to your heart. The problem you're praying away may actually be the problem God is using to prepare you. You're asking him to remove it when he is using it to refine you. You're asking him to shorten the journey when he's strengthening you to walk it. You're asking for escape while he's preparing empowerment. When God allows a problem, he never wastes it. Problems push you where comfort never will. Problems draw you closer to him. Problems strip away false strength and force you to lean on his real strength. Problems reveal weakness so he can display his power. Problems tear down walls so he can rebuild foundations. Problems close the wrong door so he can open the right ones. And hear me. There are breakthroughs waiting for you on the other side of this season that would have never come without the pressure you're feeling right now. Sometimes God has to push you out of where you were so he can bring you into what you were made for. Your problem is not proof that God has abandoned you. It is evidence that he is preparing you. So don't despise the pressure. Don't curse the season. Don't run from what feels uncomfortable. God is positioning you. God is shaping you. God is preparing something greater than anything you could have built in your own strength. And as God is positioning you through the very pressure you wish would disappear, there is something else you must understand. Every problem becomes smaller when viewed through the lens of divine presence. The moment you shift your gaze from the weight of the problem to the greatness of the one who walks with you through it, everything begins to change. Not because the problem shrinks in size, but because your perspective expands in truth. You see, the danger is not the size of the problem, it's the size of the fear that grows when you try to face it alone. Fear enlarges what is temporary. Fear magnifies what is limited. Fear distorts reality until the problem appears impossible. But when God steps into the frame of your situation, fear loses its voice and the problem loses its power. His presence reframes the entire experience. Think of the disciples in the storm. The wind was fierce, the waves were violent, the darkness was heavy. Everything around them screamed danger. But when Jesus stepped onto that boat, the storm didn't suddenly become gentle. Their fear did. The storm was still real, but his presence was more real. They were still surrounded by waves, but they were also surrounded by the one who commands the waves. What changed? Their focus, their awareness, their understanding of who was with them. And that is exactly what begins to happen when you look at your own problems through the presence of God. The situation may not immediately shift, but your heart does. Your mind does. Your confidence does. You begin to realize that you are not facing the problem, you are facing it with Him. And when you factor His presence into the equation, everything changes. You might be carrying something right now that feels far too heavy, anxiety that won't let you rest, responsibilities that stretch you thin, decisions that intimidate you, or pain that burdens your heart. But hear this clearly: what feels heavy to you is not heavy to Him. What overwhelms you does not overwhelm Him. What confuses you is not confusing to Him. A problem that towers above your strength still stands far beneath His authority. His presence is not symbolic, it is powerful. It stabilizes you when life shakes. It anchors you when doubt rises. It reminds you that the God who walks beside you is greater than the enemy that stands against you. And when His presence becomes your focus, your problem begins to lose the intimidation it once had. Not because it disappears, but because it no longer defines the outcome. That is why perspective is so critical. When you view your situation without God, the problem looks enormous. But when you view your situation with God, really view it with an awareness of His presence, your confidence returns, your courage rises, and your faith awakens. You begin to realize that the problem you feared is not as powerful as the presence that covers you. So as He positions you through pressure and prepares you through difficulty, lift your eyes, shift your focus. Embrace the truth that no matter how large the problem appears, it becomes small when seen through the God who stands right beside you. And when you begin to see your problem through the certainty of His presence, something else unfolds. Prayer opens the door for God's wisdom when your understanding falls short. Because the truth is, even when your perspective grows, even when your courage returns, even when the fear loses its grip, there will still be moments when you simply do not know what to do next. And that is not a sign of weakness. That is an invitation to divine wisdom. Your understanding has limits. Your vision has boundaries. Your knowledge is shaped by what you can see, feel, measure, and reason. But God's wisdom reaches beyond every limit, every boundary, every uncertainty you face. And prayer is the very key that unlocks access to that supernatural guidance. Think about how many times you've stood at a crossroads, unsure of which direction to take. The decision in front of you felt heavy, the options confusing, and the consequences significant. You replayed scenarios in your mind, analyzed every detail, asked others for advice, hoped for clarity, but still felt torn, still felt stuck, still felt unsure. And in moments like that, you don't need more information, you need revelation. You don't need louder opinions, you need divine direction. That is why prayer is so essential. When you pray, you invite God to speak into the places where your understanding is exhausted. You ask Him not only to show you the next step, but to reveal the step that aligns with His purpose for your life. You allow His wisdom to rise above your reasoning, His clarity to rise above your confusion, His voice to silence the noise inside your mind. Look at Solomon. When he inherited the throne, He didn't ask God for power, influence, or wealth. He asked for wisdom. Why? Because he understood that without wisdom, every responsibility becomes a burden. Without wisdom, every opportunity becomes a trap. Without wisdom, every conflict becomes chaos. And when God granted him that wisdom, nations were drawn to him, solutions flowed through him, and peace surrounded him. That same wisdom is available to you, not because you possess greatness, but because you possess access. Prayer gives you access to the mind of God, the heart of God, the direction of God. It takes you beyond the fog of your own understanding and places you beneath the light of his guidance. And here's what makes his wisdom so extraordinary. It doesn't always explain the big picture, but it always reveals the right step. Sometimes God won't show you the full path because you're not ready for it yet. But he will show you the next step, the one step that will protect you, strengthen you, or move you closer to where he wants you to be. And when you walk in that step, he gives you the next, and the next, and the next. Prayer is the doorway through which this wisdom flows. Without prayer, you rely on what you think. With prayer, you rely on what God knows. And when you align your decisions with his wisdom rather than your limited understanding, you move from confusion to clarity, from wandering to direction, from hesitation to confidence. So as you keep your eyes fixed on his presence, let prayer become the channel through which his wisdom floods your life. Because the moment you ask, the moment you seek, the moment you open that door, God begins to guide you with a wisdom that never fails. And as his wisdom begins to illuminate the steps you could never have discovered on your own, something remarkable becomes clear. The storms that threaten to overwhelm you become platforms for God's intervention. Because it is often in the fiercest moments of life, when the winds scream and the waves rise high, that God chooses to reveal his power in ways you could never experience in calmer waters. We spend so much of our lives trying to avoid storms, trying to outrun pressure, trying to escape hardship. But storms are not always signs of destruction. Sometimes they are invitations for God to step into your situation with unmistakable authority. Sometimes the very thing you fear becomes the stage where God displays his strength, his faithfulness, and his intervention in ways that redefine your faith. Think of the disciples once again on that stormy sea. They were professional fishermen. They understood the water. They knew the rhythms of the tides and the patterns of the winds. But this storm, this one, was different. It was stronger than their experience, greater than their skill, and larger than their confidence. And that is exactly when God stepped onto the scene. When their ability ended, his authority began. When their strength failed, his power took over. When they had done all they could and had nowhere left to turn, he stood and spoke a word that silenced the entire storm. That moment wasn't just about calming waves. It was about revealing who was truly in control. And that is what God does in your storms. When the pressure increases and the fear rises, he doesn't stand at a distance. He steps closer. He moves toward you. He positions himself right in the middle of the chaos. Not so the storm will see him, but so you will. Because storms have a way of stripping away distractions until all that remains is the God who has been there all along. Some of you are facing storms that feel relentless, financial waves crashing one after another, emotional winds pulling you in every direction, spiritual battles that leave you exhausted. And you're asking, why hasn't God stopped this yet? But let me suggest something. The storm might not be there to drown you, but to draw you into deeper trust, draw you into stronger faith, draw you into greater dependence on him. The storm reveals what comfort often hides. And when God intervenes in the midst of that storm, when he provides exactly what you need, when he opens the door you couldn't open, when he calms the fear that tormented your mind, when he strengthens you in ways you didn't think possible, it becomes unmistakably clear that it wasn't your effort that rescued you. It was his presence, his hand, his intervention. Storms create testimonies that sunshine never could. Storms unveil miracles that ordinary days would never display. Storms carve faith into your heart in ways that stillness never accomplishes. And so, while you walk in the wisdom He provides and anchor your life in His presence, remember this: the storms that once terrified you are becoming the stages where God will manifest His faithfulness in ways you cannot yet see. And when those storms become the very stages where God displays His intervention, something profound begins to develop within you. Persistent prayer builds spiritual endurance and personal clarity, because while God intervenes in the storm, He also strengthens you through it. The miracle is not only in what He does around you, but in what He forms within you. You see, we often approach prayer like a single moment, a quick request, a brief cry for help. But persistent prayer, ongoing, unwavering, returning to God again and again prayer, to something deeper. It shapes your inner life. It stretches your spiritual muscles. It builds endurance, the kind of endurance that cannot be gained by comfort, ease, or instant answers. Endurance is not developed when life is smooth. It is developed when life is stretching you beyond what you thought you could handle. And every time you return to God in prayer, when you don't feel strong, when you don't feel certain, when you don't feel victorious, you are building something that storms cannot break. You are developing resilience rooted in divine strength. Persistent prayer teaches you to stay steady when your emotions are unstable. It trains your heart to remain anchored when your circumstances shift. It strengthens your faith so that even when the battle intensifies, you don't collapse under the weight, you grow. But not only does persistent prayer build endurance, it also brings clarity. Clarity doesn't always arrive in a moment. Sometimes clarity is built through repeated returning, repeated seeking, repeated quietness before God. Each time you pray, He aligns your heart a little more. Each time you seek Him, He removes another layer of confusion. Each time you come before Him, He sharpens your vision, adjusts your perspective, and reveals what you could not see before. Some clarity comes instantly, but the deepest clarity comes gradually. It is like standing in a fog. At first, everything is blurry. The path ahead seems uncertain. The future looks hidden. But as you continue to pray, persistently, faithfully, consistently, the fog begins to lift, maybe not all at once, but slowly, steadily, surely. The outlines of God's direction become clearer. The distractions lose their power. The voice of fear grows quiet. The whisper of His guidance becomes unmistakable. Persistent prayer also protects you from spiritual fatigue. When life wears you down, when responsibilities pull at you from every side, when disappointment drains your strength, prayer becomes the place where God replenishes what life has taken. You walk in tired, but you walk out strengthened. You enter confused, but you leave with renewed focus. You arrive overwhelmed, but you rise empowered. And here's the beautiful thing: persistent prayer doesn't just change your circumstances, it changes you, it molds you, it disciplines you. It deepens your trust. It turns worry into worship, panic into peace, chaos into clarity. It teaches you that victory is not about what you overcome in a single moment, but about who you become through continual communion with Him. So the storms may come and the battles may intensify, but with persistent prayer shaping you from the inside out, you will not only endure, you will grow, you will rise, and you will walk in a strength greater than your own. And as persistent prayer strengthens your endurance and sharpens your clarity, something even more transformative begins to unfold. When you pray, God not only changes the circumstances around you, He changes you. And this right here is one of the greatest mysteries and greatest mercies of prayer. Because while we come to God asking Him to fix what is happening outside of us, He often begins by reshaping what is happening inside of us. So many times you enter prayer focused on what you want God to remove, repair, or restore. You bring Him your storms, your fears, your burdens, your uncertainties. But have you noticed something happens within you even before something happens around you? You may still be facing the same situation when you rise from your knees, but you are not the same person who walked into that moment of prayer. Prayer softens what life tries to harden. It calms what fear tries to agitate. It heals what pain tries to wound. It strengthens what pressure tries to weaken. Prayer does not simply react to the condition of the world. Prayer transforms the condition of your heart. There are moments when God looks at your circumstances and says, "Peace, be still." But there are also moments when he looks at you and says, "Be strong, be steady, be courageous." And that shift, when fear turns into faith, when panic becomes peace, when confusion becomes confidence, that shift is the evidence that God is not only working around you, he is working within you. You see, prayer realigns your priorities. It pulls your heart away from anxiety and draws it toward trust. It lifts your mind from the weight of the problem and anchors it in the character of God. It teaches you to respond rather than react, to wait rather than rush, to rest rather than strive. Prayer develops spiritual maturity, something no circumstance, no achievement, no human wisdom can produce. This inward change is one of the greatest gifts God gives you through prayer. Because even when he does not immediately rewrite the circumstance, he rewrites your posture toward it. And often the greatest victory is not the change around you, but the transformation within you. Think about how many times you've prayed for God to open a door, and instead he strengthened your patience. How many times you asked him to change another person, and instead he changed your attitude. How many times you pleaded for him to remove a burden, and instead he increased your capacity to carry it with grace. That is not unanswered prayer. That is transformational prayer. Because God sees what you cannot see. He knows where your character needs shaping, where your faith needs deepening, where your heart needs refining. And prayer becomes the workshop where he molds you, not with force, but with presence. Not through pressure alone, but through communion. And here is what happens next. The more God changes you, the more you begin to see your problems differently. What once terrified you now trains you. What once discouraged you now develops you. What once overwhelmed you now opens opportunities. You're no longer merely surviving the situation. You are growing through it. This is the miracle inside the miracle. While God is preparing the breakthrough around you, he is cultivating the breakthrough within you. And that inward work, that quiet transformation becomes the foundation upon which every future victory will stand. And as that quiet inward transformation begins shaping the way you see your life, there is one final truth prayer reveals. When you bring your problems to God, you are never just placing them before him. You are placing them into his hands. And his hands are not passive, distant, or indifferent. His hands are active, capable, sovereign, and deeply involved in every detail that concerns you. Because while prayer changes you on the inside, it also releases God's power on the outside, not always instantly, not always in the way you expect, but always in the way that brings his purpose to completion. Prayer is the bridge between what you cannot control and what God has already prepared. It is the place where your limited ability meets his unlimited authority. You see, when you pray, you are not simply informing God of your trouble. He already knows. Prayer is not notification. Prayer is participation. It is your invitation for him to step into your struggle and work in ways that far exceed your strength. When you place your problem in his hands, you're placing it where miracles happen, where solutions are born, where breakthroughs emerge. Those hands have parted seas. Those hands have healed the sick. Those hands have lifted the fallen. Those hands have opened prison doors, shut the mouths of lions, and carried weary hearts through valleys so dark they couldn't see their own next step. And those same hands, those mighty, gentle, sovereign hands, are holding you, guiding you, and working for you right now. Sometimes you wonder why the answer hasn't come yet, why the breakthrough feels delayed, why the situation hasn't shifted. But understand this. When the problem enters his hands, the timeline moves according to his wisdom, not your worry. He is arranging things you cannot see, aligning people you have never met, opening doors you haven't imagined, and preparing outcomes far beyond what you prayed for. And the more you pray, the more you trust those hands. The more you trust those hands, the more peace replaces fear. The more peace replaces fear, the more confident you become, not because the storm is gone, but because you know who holds it. This is why prayer is powerful. It transfers the burden. It takes the weight off your shoulders and places it on the one who never grows weary, never becomes overwhelmed, never loses control. Prayer is the moment you stop carrying what you were never designed to carry and start surrendering it to the one who has carried you all along. And here's something beautiful. When your problem is in his hands, your story is never limited by your struggle. He can take what was meant for harm and turn it into healing. He can take what was designed to break you and use it to build you. He can take what was supposed to stop you and make it the very thing that strengthens you. In his hands, nothing is wasted. In his hands, nothing is too late. In his hands, nothing is impossible. So you keep praying, not because the problem is small, but because your God is great. You keep praying, not because you understand everything, but because you trust the one who does. And every time you place your problem in his hands, you are stepping into the assurance that the God who began a good work in you will be faithful to bring it to completion.